Listen to French Prime Minister Jean Castex.
Behavior that goes against our Republican values. These principles include respecting human dignity, freedom of expression, freedom of thought, the freedom to practice one's own religion, the freedom to ensure that children's rights, the rights to education are upheld, to fight against any form of degrading treatment. It is also the value of French laïcité, secularism, one of our founding principles and values that we see as being one of the most founding values of our French nation. It is also, as I mentioned, the freedom to believe or not to believe in a specific religion. It is also to enforce a break between the private sector, the personal sector, and the public life. We need to ensure that these rights are upheld. Over the past few years, we have seen that these values have come under attack, publicly but also behind closed doors, and that these attacks have threatened our ability to coexist, to live in harmony as an overall society. We have seen children being taken out of regular schooling to be taught from home and who are being indoctrinated. We have seen sporting associations who are carrying out religious indoctrination. We have seen religious organizations who have been carrying out and enacting as channels and acting as channels where we have seen influence coming from foreign nations and foreign powers. The President of the French Republic spoke on the 2nd of October at Les Mureaux, where he said, we have to put a name on things. He said that often ideologies undermine our very nation, undermine our republic, and this is what we refer to when talking of separatist and separatism. We have seen that people have been moved to carry out violence, and this is what we refer to when we talk of separatism. It is a form of political ideology that has been turned into theory and enacted. It is a form of political influence where we see people utilizing the loopholes in our nation to undermine our nation, where they have been specifically targeting French citizens. So it is up to the French Republic to defend itself. But to defend ourselves does not mean just withdrawing in on ourselves. Ever since the beginning of the current presidency, we have been working to fight against this, and we have brought forward today a new bill to further guarantee and protect the very principles of our nation. This is not a draft bill against religions, nor against the Muslim religion in particular. It is a law that will protect freedoms. It is a bill that will further emancipate our citizens to be able to set themselves free from the yoke of religious control. To be able to uphold these objectives, we have two key areas that we want to focus on. We need to ensure that the Republican principles and values will be protected, and we want to also protect the freedom of religion. On the first aspect, government agencies will be able to have further independence and further means at their disposal to protect fundamental liberties. There will be new measures put in place for education to ensure that every child can have access and has the right to an education as in line with French principles. We will also put in further means to be able to fight against hate speech online and on social media. This draft bill is also a way for us to bring the 1905 law into the modern era. And we will do so while upholding the separation between church and state. This current bill will modernize and update the definition of religious organizations. It will call on more transparency as to where they receive funding from, especially when that funding comes from abroad. It will give prefects additional measures and additional power to be able to act faster and more effectively when a religious venue becomes a place where hate speech and violent speech and incitations to violence can be heard. We will have further government measures that will be able to enable local governments to prevent against such activities. The 1901 law on the freedom of association, the law from 1905 on the separation of church and state will be protected, but also we will find ways of updating them. These changes that we are bringing in place are essential because we have seen a change in habits, in beliefs, but also in behaviors of certain citizens. We need to be able to ensure that these laws will be even more effective now and more adapted to the current way of our society. It is my honor today to present to you this current bill, and it is also the great honor of the Cabinet who defends it as well, because it is a bill that will protect all citizens. It is a bill that is one of a great long tradition that upholds the values of our French Republic, because this current bill is one that will reinforce, that will strengthen both government freedoms but also individual freedoms, freedom of thought, expression, freedom of speech, freedom of religion. These are freedoms that have to be lived and embodied by all to their full potential. This current bill is one that is part of a greater movement, because it is part of a long-standing impetus from our government to uphold the promise that our French Republic holds, one of freedom, individual freedoms. And this is a fight that the French President has reiterated on multiple occasions. This is what we have been doing ever since 2017, when he came to office. He's leveraging all forms of the public sector to ensure that the Republican Pact, as we call it, will be upheld. As you can see here, this is all part of an ongoing process. We will put in place measures to be able to fight against clandestine schools, private schools that are not part of the official curriculum, who carry forward and try and disseminate ideological Islamism. 17,000 primary schools would fall into this category. We have lost children to these schools in the past 3 years. We will also put in place further medical housing. We will also focus on a number of key neighborhoods around France that require further government presence by increasing the powers of the police, the justice sector, so that they can carry out their activities where they are needed the most. We'll invest in further housing, social housing, that will be spread out more evenly across all of mainland France, so that we can fight against the ghettoization of our neighborhoods. And this is why I've called on the Delegate Minister for Housing to come up with new proposals to find ways of building further social housing, community housing, to better take into account the issue of social cohesion and when handing out and allocating this housing. I will now hand over to the ministers who have supporting me in presenting this bill to go into the finer details of exactly what this draft bill will contain. I would like to thank them for all of the tireless work that they have put in, and the fact that they've gone out and met with people and spoken with people to draft this law. We have the Minister of the Interior, first and foremost, but there are many other members of our cabinet who aren't here today by my side, but who nevertheless brought their contributions to the table. It was a precious input because we drafted this bill as a team, as a whole unit, as the French cabinet. I would now like to hand over to the ministers for their presentations.
Merci, Monsieur le Premier ministre, Mesdames, Messieurs.
Prime Minister, ladies and gentlemen.
Ce texte de loi, travaillé, vous l'avez dit, Monsieur le Premier ministre, depuis de très nombreuses
This bill
semaines.
is one that we've been working on, as Prime Minister has mentioned, for a number of weeks, and I would like to thank all of the ministers for their input, but also representatives from religious groups, all those members, representatives of faith organizations, local elected officials, researchers. I would also like to thank the Council of State for their opinion that they had done on this bill, because it is so important to ensure that this current bill is in line with all of the current legislation that is already in place. And it is so important to have heard and have seen the approval of the President in the Cabinet meeting. Obviously, this is a law on Republican principles, but this is very much in line with what was said at the Parliamentary Assembly back in 1905, when the original 1905 law on the separation of church and state was presented. This is a bill that is to take us beyond personal opinions and to strengthen the state. Mr. Prime Minister, I would like to thank you for having shown faith in me and my minister's delegate, because when we are elected, mayor of a local town hall, we understand what the French Republican values are. And we understand how important it is for everyone in our constituencies. And I would like to thank in particular Madame Schiappa for the work that she has done as well. There are two key areas of this current bill that I want to focus on religious practice and the importance of the public sector. There are obviously areas on human dignity and ideological influence. And obviously we have other ministers here who have brought their valuable input into the discussions that we have had on these specific areas. The first articles focus on the public sector's ability to tackle online hate speech. The first article deals in particular with one issue that all local governments are faced with, and that is the fact that it is going to be able to enable all public services, town halls, pools, any public building, to be able to help them carry out their official function. Also for all of those government agencies, for social support agencies. It will be up to them to uphold a key separation of church and state so that they can act on behalf of the French government, on behalf of Republican individuals, of Republican values. And not to fall foul of their own personal beliefs. It is also up to prefects to intervene, as it is their role to act when in relation to public housing issues. It is up to them to enforce the Republican values and see them being applied. Some people do not uphold Republican values simply because they are not fully aware of them. And as we have seen in some of the local elections, the separation of church and state, as France sees it, is not upheld by some elected officials. So it is up to prefects to enforce that. Prefects can call on administrative magistrates to act, to oversee any form of public action. Also, it is up to them to carry oversight practices as to the rules governing local pools and other local public services, to ensure that all such rules and in-house regulations uphold French principles. It is also up to the prefect to oversee any form of disbanding or dissolution of non-profit organizations when those non-profit organizations go against French principles.
These are new provisions, and this is a strong moment in the momentum splitting a church and government. Intellectual freedom associations should not be conflated with places where there is racism and the like. So this is not so much about religion, but about the separation between church and state. From now on, religions will have to apply for opening a place of worship. And this will speak to the liberty of freedom, the liberty of religious freedom, and this was not the case so far. We strongly emphasized the law of 1905. We want all associations, worship associations, 1901 associations should be turned into 1905 associations. 95% of Muslim associations are cultural associations. We want them to be under this law and to become 1905 associations. We want, before they have tax deductions, if they have foreign funding, they will have to file it. And I would like to thank those who worked on this in order to better monitor and accompany those associations, and in order to be able to shut them down when it is likely that they promote separatism, or when they have a connection with terrorism or with radical Islam ideologies. These are provisions that will cover all religions. And then there is a final provision which is favorable to religions and to financing, and this has been used for many years by all the religious advisors that we consulted. Thank you. I would like to ask the Deputy Minister Marianne Sherpa to come along and introduce some of the provisions of this bill. Thank you. Good afternoon. Gérald Darmanin, I worked with, and I worked mostly on two main aspects of this bill, which I would like to share with you. First, the issue of associations and the commitment, the engagement on Republican values. With Mr. Darmanin, we propose to when we see an association applying for public funding, whether it be from the state or from local authorities or from providing places, it doesn't have to be money. For instance, providing a room. Whenever they apply for that, we want those associations to commit to compliance with Republican values and principles. We worked on this on the basis of what I did in my earlier work. We set up a commitment charter. From now on, this will be law. And we want also to support mayors and other local authorities who are courageous, and we want to set up those contracts. Some local authorities have tried to set up charters, and sometimes they were sued in court. So it is important to say this is a law, and from now on, each association must be knowledgeable when they commit to that contract and to that compliance of values. And when this contract enshrines Republican values, we will launch two initiatives. The first is with local officials, with the Minister on Cohesion and Territories, and over the next few weeks, local authorities representatives will share with her what the principles of those commitment contracts should be. And second, there will be a consultation cycle with the individual in charge of associations.
Citizens' Right Minister, they are speaking just after the Interior Minister here in France, Gérald Darmanin, and the French Prime Minister, Jean Castex, all of them talking about this Republican values draft law that's being put into place or trying to be put into place by the French President, Emmanuel Macron.